Have any? Good morning. All right. So I apologize for the time change. Thanks for helping me to accommodate that. If you have any, like you missed this and you were hoping to watch it, just let me know. We'll find a time to be able to cover any questions you might have. There's lots of flexibility in this model. So today is one of my very favorite topics because I'm a parent, and being a parent was really a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Like, I knew it was going to be hard, and I'm still not sure if I struggled more, or struggle, let's be real, more than other people, or if my experience really is the typical experience. And it's just not something that I was privy to before having kids. But as, I don't know if you guys know this, I don't put my kids on a lot of my public social platforms, but I have 2 kids. My son is 4.5. He's the reason why I'm a little bit late today, because we had to have some hugs. And then my daughter is 2, and she has some special needs. We receive PT services and lots of medical services for her. And so in that process, I've gotten to be on the other side of the table for the first time, in that I'm the one seeking services rather than providing them. And even before we found out that Elowen, my daughter, had some conditions that needed extra help beyond what I could provide and what we could provide, in general, the idea of seeking services for my kiddos felt like something that was extra on top of what I was already experiencing as a parent. And so even though I wasn't doing that, right, like I was having the feeling that the parents that I work with have a lot on their plate, right? And I can relate to that, and I think you can too, because as BCBAs, right, it is a similar type of situation for a lot of people to parenting, right? Like, we don't always get to turn it off because we have people in emergent situations. We wear way too many hats, and it becomes really overwhelming and almost like drowning to juggle all of the little responsibilities that come with providing care for another person, and then running like the business side of things, and maintaining all of the ethical considerations and the professional mandates, right? Like, there's a lot to consider. And then with the BCBA, you have a lot of kids to be responsible for, or a lot of people to be responsible for. So it's kind of similar. And it's really freaking hard. It's really overwhelming, and it can be really painful because they're things that you care a lot about. And I don't recall if I've gone into this idea as much in this group yet, but sometimes the things that matter most to us are the things that are like the most painful or the most challenging, because there's pressure on the other side of fear of failure, right? And we've talked a lot about fear and fear of failure, or fear of being perceived in a way that's undesirable, possibly being perceived as a failure by others. And when we're trying to do something that we care so much about, the pressure becomes on sometimes. And therefore it makes a really painful relationship with the thing that we care about most. But because it's a value, it's something that is kind of intrinsic. Like, we can't really turn off that we care about it. And sometimes the more we withdraw, right, which anxiety can do that, depression can do that, right? That's why those are kind of mental health disorders or illnesses, because it creates a negative relationship with something that we care so much about, right? So it could be connection. If for parenting, it could be parenting in general. It could be kids. It could be raising your kids in the way that you want to. And when we see examples of that not working out, right? Even if they don't, even if that example doesn't actually make sense, it still feels very painful to the point where it creates an unhealthy relationship with our environment, which is depression and anxiety, right? And so when we're working with people, we have to hold all of that for them too. Right? Like sometimes there's a level of denial or a level of like self-hatred or confusion in a parent because they have a kiddo who receives services around like their parenting, right? Like we are directly telling them that the parenting style, right, or the parenting thing that they're doing isn't helping, right? And so they can make a lot of leaps to what that means for them as a person, what that means for them as what they've conceptualized a parent to be, what other people are thinking about them, what you in particular are thinking about them, right? And that doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong, the fact that they're leaping to those things, right? It's just their mind unpacking and repacking and making connections and separating itself from pain, right? The same way that it happens for us. And that is a lot to hold for someone. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at some of the practical problems that tend to happen in a clinical setting, and I think it was Chloe or Veronica who pointed out that when I say clinical setting, I also mean the home setting. I mean the school setting. I mean a clinic if you actually work in a clinic. I mean whatever you're doing in a work capacity with parents, right? So it's not necessarily the physical setting, but that it's like a professional capacity for you. No, I lost my train of thought trying to explain that. Anyway, so the idea of holding that stuff for someone else when we're burnt out, when we're overwhelmed, when we have too many things going on, ends up to be kind of an unfunctional relationship sometimes. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing something wrong or something rude. And that's okay. We can hold space for our own judgment about that situation. The same way that we're going to try and help our parent that we're working with hold space for their judgment about the situation that they're into. And I hope that that illustrates just a little bit why I recommend walking the walk of ACT more than learning the theory of ACT. Because what I just described with that parent, right, is also happening with you. It's something that we've been unpacking. We're on week 6 now, for 6 weeks, right? And we'll continue to unpack for basically the rest of our life. Social conditioning and social deconditioning is fusion and diffusion. So it means literally the same thing, right? And we all have those things, and it is hard to work with. So when I say ACT starts with you, when I insist on things like this, where we're going to start unpacking our own stuff, we're going to get into the weeds, we're going to walk into the places that don't feel safe, they don't feel comfortable around our own stuff, right? That's when we're going to be able to create a life that is connected to our values, where we have experience and wisdom within this theory, where we can help guide other people through that as well. And in the clinical setting that I'm talking about, maybe autism intervention or child services, like school, whatever, that is in service of their child's best outcomes, right? Because when we've got a parent who's healthy, happy, thriving on all of the areas of life, and they're relating to you in a way that is, working away from their shame, working away from their guilt, noticing their judgment of those things, and instead allowing themselves curiosity, compassion, and kindness, because you also give yourself curiosity, compassion, and kindness, and you've modeled that for them and you've held their hand a little bit, they're going to be able to interact with your interventions completely differently, right? They're going to be able to interact with you as a provider completely differently. They're going to be able to create goals that are completely different from the ones that they're creating from this place of fear when they start getting into that place of curiosity. So let's talk about that. Okay, so when I'm going to start with us, because that's, sorry, it looked like my husband's AirPods were connecting to my thing, and that would have probably messed up things. So when we think about that, what I want you to do is think about parents who are frustrating, okay? Parents who don't show up, parents who ask you to make plans for goals and then don't do them, right? They specifically said, like, we're gonna make this thing, I wanna make it happen, and then they don't. You make the program, you put all this time and effort into it, and then they don't show up, and you're mad. It's reasonable to be mad. That's really, really frustrating. But let's talk about why that happened, right? Why that happens consistently. Why it can become almost an adversarial situation between clinicians and parents within the clinical setting, or even within the educational setting. Personally, I've heard dozens, if not hundreds, of BCBAs and parents complain about, or sorry, BCBAs and teachers complain about parents, just straight up complain, right? And so let's think about what that means for us, right? It means that we're not connecting with the thing that matters to us too, right? Like the child outcomes that we're really passionate about creating, if you're in a clinical setting, right, working with children, which I'm assuming is the case, or you're working with clinicians who do care about that, right? So therefore, the child outcomes are of value to you as a person. When we're creating when there's an adversarial relationship with the care provider, it is going to take us further away from those child outcomes, right? Because even if it is in the parent's best interest to do the thing, it is messy and it is confusing and it is weird. The same way that it's messy, confusing, and weird for us to be able to sometimes move towards the thing that matters, right? I've talked with dozens of people who say, like, I need to do this thing. I need to leave this job. I need to start my own business. I need to take a vacation or a day off. But then they just don't. And even though the opportunity is there, they don't see it as an opportunity. And the parents are functioning in that same way. And I would argue that we are too when we're complaining about the parents. Because we want them to want. We want to be able to make an impact on them. We want to be able to see them be successful in the work that we provided. And so when we complain about them, it's a withdrawal, right? It is a separating ourselves from something that matters to us as a protection strategy, because it hurts to see it not working out. And we're confused and frustrated and don't know how to create something different. And so to complain is almost to alleviate the pain, especially since we don't have an idea of how to make it better. We've probably exhausted a lot of our resources and it's still not necessarily working. And so then we come to this stalemate withdrawal situation. You know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you've got some secret sauce or you've been really lucky. So let's talk about what the secret sauce is in this situation, right? So what I just talked about was a self as context situation and a values, right? Just to make sure that we're talking about ACT here and that you see how those things are connected. Because that's one thing that I think is important for us, is to be able to connect the ACT values, because you guys are doing ACT in here big time, for real. And sometimes it doesn't feel like it because you aren't connecting it to the hexaflex. So I would encourage all of you, I think I said this in week 1, and I can send to you guys, I made a pretty one. I'll just go ahead and pop it up for you guys to maybe print it out or something and put it up on your wall, or maybe make it your background. I don't know. But when we start feeling those frustrations things, when we start moving into the withdrawal that I was kind of talking about, like we find it valuable to work with these parents, they're not doing the things that we tell them to do. If they only would do what we said, then things would get better and then we would all feel better, right? But it's just not happening. So let's take a look at a few questions that I'd like you to maybe write down if you're watching this, okay? We can't do it all. I'm pausing for a point of emphasis. That's just a truth that we have to accept. We cannot do it all. I want you to really feel that for a minute, because to me that makes me want to cry, because there's so many things that I feel like I could do, and the fact that I can't do all of it at once, right, is hard, because those things that I want to do mean so much to me. But when we start accepting that we can't do it all at once, right, that trying to prevents us from being successful in it, then it gives us a new framework to work within. Okay, so that was an acceptance one. We can't force someone to do something. Now that probably feels yucky. I know I've said that before in this group too. But when we think about being a behavior analyst, there's this like pseudo feeling that we can get people to do stuff if only we're good enough at it, if only we have the right environmental contingencies, if only we try as hard as we can get them to do it. And that's just not true with all the people, including the children. There are some times where the thing that we're trying to get someone to do is outside of that person's values, of that person's capacity, right? And so trying to make them do something is another pill we have to swallow. And so when we take a look at those two, right, those two acceptance, I'd like to invite you to notice when you're having thoughts that are those things, right? Like if you're noticing like, I can add that extra thing in, really think about it and evaluate if that's true. Is that true? Is that helpful? Can I see this in a different way? I hopefully have beat those 3 questions into your head. If I haven't, please go ahead and write them down. I'll say them again. Is this true? Is it helpful? Can I think about this in a different way? When we start noticing that we're having thoughts that aren't helpful, right? We can interact with them in that way. And can I do it all? And can I force someone to do something? Like just notice when those thoughts are kind of happening. They might not show up for you in a way that is super observable at first, right? Because it's going to be super salient. It's going to be in the operating system part of your brain rather than the app that's forward facing. It might not come to you in those words, but like look at what is happening there, like the function of the thing that you're trying to do, and start noticing when those are coming up for you. And then the thing to shift with is like this tightly held control, right? A classic ACT exercise is dropping the rope. I feel like I've explained it, but like we're pushing and pulling against this thing that we're trying to control. And when we pull so hard, we get into a position where we have to keep pulling. Otherwise we'll fall over and the whole thing will topple down, right? Because of the pullback tension that we have. And sometimes if we're not putting enough effort in, then it's going to pull us over, right? And so we're stuck in this effortful pulling situation with variable amounts of effort in order to maintain the relationship with the situation. And that's draining as fuck, right? So what's the other option? It's to flow with it. It's to accept that we don't have control and that we can only offer options, and we can get creative in our own curiosity about what's working, what's not working, how can we think about this differently in our interventions. I call that flow, but in the example I was talking about with the rope, it's about dropping it, right? It's about just, I'm not going to play that game anymore. I'm not going to keep trying to control and keep putting in this draining effort. I'm gonna change the game. I'm gonna put the rope in my lap because that rope is still meaningful. I can put it in my back pocket. I can do something else with it, put it over my shoulder, whatever it is. But I can keep my hands free for something else, and I can flow with this situation rather than try to control. And so when we start practicing noticing that we're having these thoughts of control, and again, this could actually apply outside of parent support, right? It's an example at this point because I think that it's applicable and it's helpful to the situation and I care about it. But this is true for anything. Start noticing that you're having those feelings, and then start practicing noticing if we're doing the push and pull, and finding a way to ask, like, is this helpful? Does it have to be true? Can I think about it differently? And let's start interacting with that situation differently, because chances are you've been interacting with it in the same ways for a long time, and that's why we keep having this cycle of this like thing that we don't want to happen. And we need to interact with the situation differently if we want to get something different out of it. And that, my friends, is where behavior analysis comes in. How can we do something differently? Sans the judgment that we're not doing it enough or right? Because that's not helpful. That's not, doesn't have to be true, right? And we can think about that differently. So the next part is like your why, right? Why would you go through all of this effort with these people and this stuff? And that's a question that has to actually be looked at. Okay, I think there's a thing in behavior analysis where, and we're going to talk about it next week too, where we don't have as many options in our fields. And a lot of us are steered towards autism intervention in its various ways that it looks, right? Like I talked about those different clinical settings. I lump them all together. And to be quite fair, like disability intervention in children disability, or disability intervention, right? But a lot of us get stuck in autism, or maybe in a school where they branch off a little bit, or maybe we get, autism related diagnoses like ADHD and things like that. Okay, I lump that stuff together. But as a field, we are geared towards those people because insurance will pay for that, right? And so we feel kind of comfortable going into a job where insurance will take care of that, right? Even though it's a pain in the butt and insurance can be hard to deal with, there's a reliable payer, and people are willing to work through that reliable payer to receive services, and there is a huge demand, right? And so it is a very comfortable, safe career path to go in. I was actually just having this conversation with my husband yesterday because I got like a little fear around like the winter spikes of COVID and like the hyperinflation thing. I don't need to perpetuate my fears onto you. It felt really big in the moment, but it's kind of unfounded. But I was like, well, I can always get a job, right? I can always just go find a clinic and get myself a BCBA job. There's more work than is being done, and I'll be fine, right? That safety, though, can be something that we can get stuck in, and something that can feel falsely connected to our values sometimes. And so when I say your why are you putting in the effort with these parents? Why are you putting in the effort with these children? I'm saying this because it might not be your why. This might not feel good to you because it is not what you want to do. And if that's actually true for you, if I just gut punched you with that statement, one, I'm sorry. I know that that's uncomfortable. But two, this probably is going to be an ongoing problem that is going to plague you until you make a change, because you're probably not going to want to interact with those people in putting in all of the effort about all of that stuff I said before, right? Because it doesn't matter so much to you. And that's hard, effortful stuff that I just asked you to do. It also feels out of scope sometimes, and a lot of the times people say that because they don't want to do that work, right? Or they're afraid that they're going to make a mistake in that work. But truly, the ACT model gives you enough. ACT plus ABA gives you enough to be able to think about these things within this capacity. And sure, there's no shame in referring out, but we're still going to have to hold space for that parent if we're going to be working with their child. Even if they get a therapist for themselves, that's not going to just fix it and make it go away. You're going to still have to be able to hold space. You can get more help, right? That person might need more help than you can have time for. And we can talk about time, but the bigger problem is then you have the space for, right? And we can still put barriers or boundaries around that relationship. We can still make it ethical. We can still make it where you can receive help within that scope. I was very lucky in that I worked in a clinic where I had a supervisor who was also a counselor, okay? So I received direct counseling supervision to help me on my cases. That was a huge boon. And not everybody has that, but that doesn't mean that you can't get it, right? That doesn't mean that we can't hold space for these parents and make a relationship of curiosity with them around what could possibly be getting in their way so that they can get the support that they need, even if you're not going to do all of the support for them. But not wading into the weeds with them is going to affect the child's outcomes, right? It's going to make it so that they're not going to be able to interact with what you're doing with the child. And ABA is so intrusive to the family unit. The number of hours going into their homes, if we're not willing to hold space for that relationship in a way that is effective, then maybe that's really not the space for us. Maybe it's only been the path that's laid out for us, and maybe we have to make something different. Okay. If you want to continue talking on that, let me know in the comments below. Let's keep having the conversation. I'm going to shift over to the people who this is a yes. You're like, absolutely, I want to hold space for these people. I want to think about it. I've got a full body, lit up yes situation here. How, Mallory? How do we go from this thing to this thing? So here comes broken record Mallory again. So the way that we do it is by, one, working on ourselves. What is preventing us from accessing our reinforcement or our values, our goals, what matters to us in our lives right now? Because what I'm hopefully outlining to you is something that's big, that's meaningful, that's impactful, right? But that's also really uncomfortable and really hard, and it's probably a skill you don't have up to 100% yet, and you're gonna have to practice it in real time, which means you're gonna have to be open to making mistakes. And how do we create a place where we can make safe mistakes in service of our goals in the future and make them, like constructive, and that we can tolerate those mistakes in a way that's constructive and productive? It's about creating self-care where we sit, right? Connecting more with our values even outside of work. So that way when we make a mistake, it is within the context of a full, big, overflowing, juicy life, right? And that we can forgive the mistakes that we make because it's just one facet of who we are. And we can put the learning that is happening in the context of service for the future, being able to repair any situations that are impacting us now, right? And be able to see that even if we are imperfect, there's still good that comes from it, right? Because even if you didn't, execute a conversation that perfectly followed the whole hexaflex, or you explained something, you're probably still creating a situation where you have an open level of communication with someone that already respects you, that already sees you as an authority figure, that's going to kind of keep coming back, and you can try again. And even if that person doesn't pick up what you're selling and they're not a part of it, and maybe they even leave. I actually had that happen where I switched to a parent support model in my clinic, and I had a few parents be like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do it the other way. I'm leaving you, right? That was hard, because that meant that, one, the parents didn't like me. Two, I wasn't going to continue to helping that kid. And then that made me feel like, well, what's this kid going to do, right? But that takes us back to the control thing, right? That takes us back to we can't make decisions. We can't force someone. We can't control them. And we can only notice the feeling like we need to control them and allow ourselves to ask the big questions, right? Like, is the judgment that I'm giving myself helpful? Does it have to be true? Can I see it differently? And for me, that situation, the way that I see it differently now is that, one, I got to practice being in alignment with my values, right? Creating a boundary around how I was going to interact with people, because I felt that the old way of interacting with them was no longer effective. And allowing them to make their own choices. I don't know what's best for them. I just don't. They do. And that's okay. They can make those choices. And I can practice any judgment that I have about those choices, holding space for that and letting it go, right? That's acceptance. And so opening ourselves up to being able to walk through like the fire a little bit, the discomfort of re-navigating how we want to embody our values, align to our goals, create committed action, is a moving target, right? It is just like balance, right? It is something that is going to be danced between the environment and your prioritization of your goals and values in every single moment. And so I think some acceptance for that as a process is also going to be a huge part of being able to, if you're in this category, right, you still might be deciding, like, am I in the like, I don't know if this is my thing, versus the yes, full body thing. And that's okay. But if we're going to do all of this hard stuff, we are going to have to create a life in the now that makes space for the discomfort of the learning process, right? Think about when you were in graduate school, or when you were in school in general, just learning something. You made a lot of mistakes, right? You had supervisors who were helping you learn. You did a lot of assignments, you did a lot of practices, you did a lot of supervision, right? And that was kind of okay. It was okay. What if we believed that it was okay for us to start working, with a margin of error towards adding something new to our scope, right? How do we do that as professionals? Well, it's going to have to start with making space for you to mess up, and for you to be able to contextualize the mess up as still good, right? And it's not even that it's just good for you, like it could still be good for the client. The client doesn't know that you did it imperfectly. They don't. And most of the time, it is not going to be something that sinks the relationship. And even if it is something that sinks the relationship, how can we see that situation differently? Because maybe they get to start over with a new provider who lays down a different set of framework, and maybe there's going to be change that helps the kiddo, right? I don't know. We can't know. We just get to trust. And that's a little bit of acceptance too. So again, the secret sauce, as I'm coming down to it, is the idea of creating a life here that can sustain you, right, in making those hard moves, right? When we talk to students, sometimes we say like, oh, are you making time for the things that matter to you, right? Well, as professionals, we have to do that too. We have to take care of ourselves. Otherwise, we can't do this hard work. We can't make space for that. So that's why I started with life balance. That's why I do life balance work, because when this moment, present moment, and like the near future is something that is going to be supportive and nourishing and safe for the most part, right? I like to think about it like 80% nourishing, safe, supportive, and 20% growth, right? More than growth. So that way the hard stuff is in its like proportion. And of course there's phases where that changes, but when we're here, and then we also have a very clear vision of where we want to go, right? And we know how the hard stuff is accessing our values, and we know what it is in service of and what it is helping us towards, then we can increase our discomfort tolerance to be able to do the hard thing. Now, all of that stuff that I just said for you is what we need to also help our parents of the kiddos be able to do. Because if that's going to be helpful for us, right, to be able to do the hard stuff, then we can also walk those parents into those places so that they can start sorting through that hard stuff, to be able to start figuring out what barriers are getting in the way of the interventions that they told you. I think in the example prior, I said, you know, sometimes we've got these parents who say like, oh, I want to do this, right? I'm bringing this to the table. You do all of the effort to put together this beautiful intervention, they do nothing. And you're frustrated, right? Well, if we've got a parent who is doing what I was talking about for us, right? Where we've got a system of self-care in the now, right? We've got a level of mindfulness, of self as context, and of diffusion from the judgments, the self-identities, the beliefs that are preventing us from being able to be flexible with our current situation. And we know where we're going, and we know why that place is so important. I have like a whole chapter in my book on parent support about justifying goals. So that way it's like creating clarity as to why this effort is important. Then they can practice making those they're gonna bring you different interventions. They're gonna interact with your interventions differently. They're gonna interact with goal setting differently. They're gonna interact with generalization procedures differently. They're gonna show up a completely different person, because they're gonna be interacting with all of these situations in a more flexible way, right? But that starts with us interacting with the situation in a more flexible way, right? And all of that serves the client outcomes, right? Because if we've got a different parent showing up, who is the person who's doing the most for the kiddos, then we've got a completely different situation for the kid. When parents are supported, children thrive, right? That's going to be the title of book 2. But it starts with us as clinicians. That's the rub, right? Like my whole first book is about learning, like parents learning how to do what we just talked about, creating a system of support in the now, getting really clear about where they're going, and then being able to work with the tough stuff in a different way to be able to be helpful, right? To be able to evaluate for like solid truth there, or if there's another truth that a different perspective could provide, and then being able to think about it differently, right? And evaluate those things all the time. Because that's going to help the child outcomes. Like I could have written a book that was like, let's teach you all the ABA strategies that are part of parent training, okay? But that's not going to help the person who's not showing up for parent training. That's not going to help the person who's not doing the interventions and they're sitting through all your parent training, right? We need to interact with parent training differently, which is why I choose to call it parent support instead, and why I focus on provider interventions, right, for us to be able to make sure that this is something that is part of our values to begin with. And so that we can start thinking differently about how we're going about it, so that we can get different outcomes to support the people who we want to support. All right, so I am going to go ahead and wrap this training up. Thank you again for your flexibility around the timing this week. I apologize. I know that this wasn't what I said would happen, but sometimes we get to roll with the punches too. And I realized I could model that, and it was kind of important this time. So again, if you guys have extra questions, go ahead and comment down below. Make your own comment. You guys can always make your own comment box. I saw that Tara, you said, Mallory gave me permission to make a post. You guys can make your posts anytime. Please make your posts. Love it. Make posts. Let's all talk. Let's make a community. I want you guys to feel comfortable in this community. And if you have more questions that maybe I didn't cover and I moved the time around and I'm cutting it a few minutes short, I'll make another video. You let me know. I'm all about making things happen here, and I would love to do that. That's my passion. Okay. I'll chat with you guys soon. Bye.